why don't I just forget conventions of what I think a novel is? And so I just started over.
Welcome to VoiceOver. I'm your host, Heather Bigley, and I talk to people about the movies that made a mark, that led to cinematic epiphanies. And it's not always the movie you'd expect. Today's movie is Rebecca from 1941, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, starring Joan Fontaine, Laurence Olivier, George Saunders, and Judith Anderson. If you know anything about classic Hollywood, you know this movie is stacked with a killer cast. We're going to get into it. Rebecca is an adaptation of Daphne du Maurier's 1938 novel, which itself is a reworking of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre from 1847. And this is not something I knew or realized until I was watching it one more time for this interview. And I was like, wait, this is Jane Eyre. But if you don't know the story, a young orphaned girl is whisked from obscurity and poverty by an older rich man, and she has to make a decision about his dark past. My guest today is Nina McConigley, author most recently of How to Commit a Post-Colonial Murder that came out just in January, published by Pantheon. Nina is from Wyoming. Her short story collection, Cowboys and East Indians, won the 2014 PEN Open Book Award and the High Plains Book Award. She was also a 2022 recipient of the National Endowment for the Arts Creative Writing Fellowship. She teaches at Colorado State University. Stick around after the conversation for more movie recommends. We're going to talk about your novel.
Okay.
Gauges with all these forms and genres. We've got the teen magazine quiz, the coming of age narrative, the British mystery, and you've also written short stories and for theater. So what do you see that the novel's able to accomplish that other forms aren't able to accomplish?
Yeah, that's such a good question because just having a play going on almost at the exact same time that the novel came out, it was such an interesting thing to see the play come together on a stage with costumes. And I mean, not that there wasn't room for imagination, but it was being presented to you and the audience is experiencing it all in real time at that moment, that performance. And I do think a novel, I mean, I definitely have read books that I read when I was 20 and now read as a 50-year-old, and they've hit really differently. And so I think the novel, you know, it allows imagination in a way that I think some of the other forms don't, that you're kind of building this world in your mind. I do think it also asks you to really think about language in a very different way. I mean, certainly the play has great language, but you're also just observing so many other things at the same time, the music, the costumes, the lighting. I really love the way a novel just asks, you know, you as the reader create the world in a way that I just don't think is the same as other forms. I just think also the novel, everybody's bringing their, I mean, I suppose any form, everyone's bringing their own worlds and lives to anything, whether a movie, whether it's a piece of music. But I do think with a novel, it just asks you to, again, just world build and create in your mind in a way that I don't think other genres do.
So as someone who's written in all these different forms, when you have a story idea, do you start thinking about the form first, or do you just start writing and then think, oh, I think I've got a short story here, or, oh, I think I've got how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, because my first book was published with short stories, I think I definitely thought, okay, I want to do a novel next. I don't know what that will be. And I mean, I think I didn't start it for a long time because I didn't have an idea that was going to sustain me over, you know, over what would be a short story. I think I was used to really short form. Nothing was over 25 pages. And with a novel, you're just sitting with it so much longer that I really did I thought about it differently than a story. I don't think with stories, I sit and think, oh, this is my theme of my story, or I want to explore like splits or independence or sisterhood. I feel like stories for me more start with character, and I think, or a funny situation, and then I like build the story around it. And I think with the novel, I definitely did think about, like, I want to write a book about sisterhood. I want to write a book about thinking about independence and all the different ways that goes from Indian independence to like independence of, you know, girlhood into womanhood. And and those splits that happen in between. So I definitely think differently. It's interesting. I've just started a new project, and I guess I would say it's a novel, even though I haven't written that much of it so far, partly because I just see just a bigger world. And so, but I'll see. I also wrote a very slim novel. My novel isn't a very big one. So even within the novel form, I think it is it's pretty compact.
Yes. Well, I want to talk about that because there's so much in this novel, right? We've got otherness, biracial identity, sexual abuse, revenge, sisterhood, and then it is so slim. I came to your reading and I was like, how did you decide to put all of this in this tiny little package? So can you talk a little bit more about what that process was like?
Well, I had written a whole other draft of the novel in third person that was a much more traditional sort of bigger novel. I would say it was very competent, but it wasn't very interesting, and I just didn't love it. And so I restarted again, and I restarted around the time of the pandemic. I had a newborn. I was feeling pretty sad. There was a lot of political and world events that were happening that were very stressful, and I was reading a lot more poetry. And I feel like maybe because I had a new baby and I couldn't dig into a big novel the way I used to. I was just reading a lot more poetry, and I was looking at a lot more white space and how poets can convey so much with so little language. And then I just started reading a bunch of books that were kind of smaller books. I was rereading Department of Speculation, and there was a book by a British writer named Natasha Brown called Assembly that really struck me. And I read Max Porter's Grief is a Thing of Feathers, and I just became really drawn to a kind of a very small experimental novel. And so I thought, if I'm going to start and rewrite over, why don't I just forget conventions of what I think a novel is? And so I just started over, and it was in writing over, I was surprised that these other forms like the quizzes and the second person and all these kind of maybe more weird things were coming out of the woodwork that I didn't know what they were, but it just felt right to me in a way that I had been working on the book for so long before and it hadn't felt right. So I kept with it. Maybe I was just really sleep deprived with a newborn. I don't know, but it worked. Yeah, it worked out.
So you're making me think of, I never read Wonder Boys, but did you ever watch Wonder Boys?
Yeah.
And so there's that moment. Yes, he puts the paper in the typewriter and he types the page number. It's like 2442. And you're like, oh my gosh. And then the Katie Holmes character is like, it's like you're not making any choices. Right. You need to make choices. And I feel like you're just telling me, like, you're kind of saying to me, well, I had to make choices because this is what my life looked like. But I think also you were drawn to kind of make some really tough choices. Yeah. So good for you. That's really difficult.
Well, at that point, it had been so much space between books that I was like, no one probably cares anyway. So why don't I just have a little more fun with it than I've been having? And I did. I kind of rediscovered what I liked about the novel and what I enjoyed about writing, which had been a little bit lost. I think I was worrying too much about publishing. I was worrying too much about other things and not the art. And I think I got back into what I actually liked.
Well, here's the $100 question. If this were adapted as a film, what kind of stylistic choices would you be really interested in?
Well, first of all, that it would be filmed in the West and in Wyoming. I feel like so many movies that I see that are supposed to be the West, I think they're filmed in Canada, which I know there are reasons, but I like that. Those of us who grew up around here, like, we know our flora and fauna and we know what's correct. So I would want that. But stylistically, I mean, it's interesting because I kind of already had this experience a tiny bit with the play. And I remember, like, even with the play, when the Denver Center said they were first doing it, I was like, I just want the director to be someone who is either Asian or Indian or someone who really understands the West. And has lived in the West and understands what it's like to be in a more rural community. I don't want someone who's from a city kind of projecting their ideas of Westernness and cowboys and what they think. Because I've seen that. It's kind of, I mean, I go to Jackson Hole. I mean, people have an idea of what I guess people in the West wear, big hats and fur coats and I don't know what else. But so I wouldn't want any of that. I guess that's the one thing. But I do see a movie, if this was done, being more of a, I mean, it's never going to be a blockbuster. It's a pretty heavy subject, but I think it's like, I think of it as being much more of a sort of arty, slower film. I don't know if that makes sense. So much of Georgie as a narrator is observing and watching things around her. And so I just would hate it if that sort of looking or observing goes away. I would just not want to lose that because I love her voice so much.
Well, you sent me a list of movies, and they are really interesting
They're
to
very
me.
different.
The Double Life, yes, The Double Life of Veronique, Rebecca. We're going to talk about Rebecca. Sense and Sensibility, Pather Panchali, and Salam Bombay. And my question was first, do you see any commonalities? But maybe the question is better. Are these more representatives of like times in your life or different eras? That's what I began to wonder.
I think they are. I mean, I saw Sense and Sensibility when it was in the theater in 1995, I believe it was. So I was in college, and I was a very big, I read a lot of romantic and Victorian literature. That was what I focused on as an English major. And so there was something about that film, I think also being directed by an Asian director, that I just thought, again, the sensibilities, like Ang Lee's so beautiful in the way there's like an opening shot where Kate Winslet she's playing the piano and she kind of looks up, and it's just I don't know, it was just such a beautiful shot. And I just love the sensibility of his filmmaking, to use the title. I mean, I had never seen a lot of Indian movies. I had seen a lot of Bollywood type movies when I was a kid. We would rent them. We would drive from Wyoming to Denver, and there was like one or two Indian stores at that time, and you could rent VHS tapes and take them back, and then my mom would mail them back. And there weren't as many, we speak Tamil, and there weren't as many Tamil language films. A lot of them were Hindi or more Bollywood. But so I was very limited in what I saw in terms of Indian movies. I was like, these are very long. There's a lot of song and dance. Like, what's happening? And so I think when I saw Salam Bombay, it was kind of the first like more arty film I had ever seen of an Indian. I don't know, I was just so drawn into the story in a way that I just hadn't been with a lot of Indian films. Just my education had been so Western, and I'd only really seen Western films. I'd only really read Western books. And I feel like in college, all of a sudden, I started reading like Indian writers. I started seeing Indian films and seeing, of course, there was a long lineage before that. I just didn't know it. I wasn't exposed to it. And it was hard to get in Wyoming. So those films definitely. And then, my mom is a really big film buff. And growing up, when we moved to Wyoming, she hated that we didn't have movies. And so she started, I grew up in Casper, Wyoming. She started the Casper Cinema Club, and she would order these movies from New York. They would come in their film projector canisters. She had someone that was a projectionist, and they would play them in this basement room in the library. And a lot of it were classic old films. I saw like my first Charlie Chaplin and other movies. And I mean, she was limited by what she could get sent to Wyoming, but I saw a lot of foreign films when I was a kid as well. And all these like film buffs would come. It was like that's how we met most of our family friends. And so I had grown up seeing a lot of movies. And when we would go to Denver, my mom, sometimes we'd go to 3 movies back to back. She was dying to see movies.
Well, let's dive into Rebecca. Rebecca's an interesting choice, actually, because some people say, or even Hitchcock himself says, it's not really his film. It's David O. Selznick's film, because David O. Selznick had already gotten like the talent in place and everything in place. And then he brought in Hitchcock. But for me, I think of it as a Hitchcock film because of all the dread in that movie and all the, it's a Daphne du Maurier. Like he's adapting Daphne du Maurier from the 1930s, Jamaica Inn, stuff like that. What drew you to Rebecca? Like when you first saw it, why wasn't it boring? Why weren't you like in tears over it?
I think there's like an aspect of Rebecca that's a little Cinderella-esque, of like this poor girl gets seen by this rich man, and everyone's kind of rude to her, and she's working her way up and doesn't even have any gumption, really. She's just working her way up. I mean, Maxim sort of sees her and singles her out, and she gets to all of a sudden have this like fairy tale life of this rich house and servants and this beautifulness. And of course, then it just becomes like completely about dread, and you feel the ghosts so much. And it was so interesting. I think the first time I watched it, I didn't realize we never know her name, we never know. I mean,
Yeah.
there were just things that as a storyteller I was so interested in, and how, Mrs. Danvers was such a, like, I don't know, she to me was one of the greatest villains I've ever met on film. I still think she's like amazing. I think her performance,
Yes.
many a Halloween I've been like, I need to be Mrs. Danvers, because she's just like so awful and so suggestive.
You're overwrought, madam. I've opened a window for you. A little air will do you good. Why don't you go? Why don't you leave Manderley? He doesn't need you. He's got his memories. He doesn't love you. He wants to be alone again with her. You've nothing to stay for. You've nothing to live for, really, have you? Look down there. It's easy, isn't it? Why don't you? Why don't you? Go on. Go on. Don't be afraid.
And she doesn't ever do anything overtly for so much of the film, but it's just, you feel her, like, I don't know, it's just the first time I ever realized like how you can create a lot of fear and unease without doing anything. Like, that just, and the party scene, I just felt like, oh, she's so tricked. She's so tricked. And it like ultimately felt very romantic to me. I saw the movie first and I was like, no, he does love her, He didn't love his first wife.
No, he didn't. Of course not. That moment. Okay, so there are so many little film things that I want to talk about. One is, you talked about how he kind of sees her and he starts a romance with her, even though she's not really sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, am I just another companion, right? Or is he in love with me? And I just think of those car shots where he's on one side of the screen and she's on the other, and she is having like every emotion possible, like she's like elated that she's invited, and she's a little nervous to talk to him. And then over on this side, we've got Olivier, who's supposed to be known for his acting. And it's just kind of like, who doesn't even realize this is happening. Like, this whole world is happening right next to him. And I just thought, this is so interesting to me, because on one level, the realism of the time is not defined the same way as we define realism here, right? But like, she seems almost, I don't know what the word is. There seems to be something wrong with her. Like, as a woman in my 50s watching her, I'm like so worried because
I know.
there seems to be something wrong. What do you think about that?
It's interesting because I think when I saw the movie the first time, I thought it was much more romantic. And now watching it again, I'm like, oh, I feel like he's picking like a simpler girl or someone that isn't like his wife, so he can have some fantasy or have control over her in a way that he didn't have over his first wife. Especially when I feel like they get to the house and he just doesn't help. He doesn't help her settle in as much. He just kind of is like, here, you're rich. I mean, the fact that the bedroom has been kept exactly the way that Rebecca did, it's very creepy.
You've always wanted to see this room, haven't you, madam? Why did you never ask me to show it to you? I was ready to show it to you every day. It's a lovely room, isn't it? Loveliest room you've ever seen. Everything is kept just as Mrs. De Winter liked it. Nothing has been altered since that last night. Come, I'll show you her dressing room. This is where I keep all her clothes. You would like to see them, wouldn't you?
Very creepy. And I don't maybe hold it up the same way I used to. She is like so untouched and pure and kind of doesn't know the ways of the world, and just, I mean, also knowing how class works in England. I went to school in England and I had never experienced anything quite, I think Americans are very like class is just different. You can work your way up. You can change who you are. But I just feel like in England, it's a little more entrenched about what you're allowed to, how your status moves around. And I think that, I don't see it as romantically. I feel like she is experiencing something completely, you're right, experiencing something completely different.
There's also the great touch of every time she's in Manderley, which is the big fancy house, and every time she goes to open a door, the door knob is by her ear and is massive. So there's almost this Alice in Wonderland kind of, that she's been shrunk and she is a child and she's, trying to push through these big doors to get at the truth of what her situation is. I thought that was very interesting. I mean, I'd noticed that before, but this time I was like, there's someone really thought about this set design.
No, and the windows are huge. When you're in Rebecca's room, you're right. The size is very odd now that I think about it. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You talked about Mrs. Danvers, Judith Anderson.
So good.
Fantastic.
So good.
I also love Jack Saunders, who plays Cousin Jack. That voice with that accent and that diction.
I hear he went up to London, left his little bride all alone. It's too bad. Isn't he rather afraid that somebody might come down and carry you off?
Oh my gosh.
To be honest, Laurence Olivier is probably the least interesting, one of the most least interesting characters in the movie. He really, who cares? It's all about Mrs. Danvers and Cousin Jack, and even Mrs. Van Hopper in the beginning. She's kind of got this presence that you're okay, great. You're right. Laurence Olivier is Laurence Olivier, but I didn't even know who he was when I first saw the movie. I think my mom said these are great actors, but I was in love with Joan Fontaine and Mrs. Danvers. Those were the two that were they were everything.
So on this viewing for me, I really was oh, this is a remake of Jane Eyre, which hadn't really occurred to me before. I don't know why it never occurred to me. There's a fire at the end, for goodness sakes, right? The whole place gets burnt down. But what do you think about that connection? I mean, we've kind of have a source material that is centuries old.
Yeah.
Then we have Daphne du Maurier. Then we have, Selznick. Then we have Hitchcock. There's all these people who are interpreting this story. It seems like a really important story to our generation or to our century even.
It's interesting because when I was thinking about that question, I was making a little list in my head of all the ways they're connected. And I'm of course, both of these are kind of young, unworldly girls that are in service of some sort, whether it be a governess or a companion. We both have these older men that are haunted by their first marriage. Obviously, Rebecca's dead, but she's still, they still sort of haunt in very different ways. They both are not going to make this second wife happy. There's something about Jane Eyre. I always loved Jane Eyre more than Wuthering Heights or anything, because I did feel like Jane comes back on her own terms with her own money. And in the end, she gets this money, she comes back, she's okay, I'm going to be with you. I do feel maybe it's a little bit of a letdown now that I say it, that the second Mrs. De Winter the house burns down, but we don't really know what's going to happen. I mean, I guess they're going to be okay, right? I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Hopefully.
Well, and I think that's interesting what you're talking about. Jane is the one who sticks up for herself. She gets proposed to and she says no. That's not, well, I mean, she says yes, but ultimately she says, okay, that's crazy, I'm going to leave. And she becomes her own person. She has some of the greatest speeches, I think, of literature for a woman, I am my own person. Right. Just because I'm poor doesn't mean you can dismiss me or you can take advantage of me. But I think the second Mrs. De Winter, she comes of age when she decides to collude with Maxim, right?
Yeah.
When she decides, I'm going to help you escape, basically the law. And that's when we see her become an adult, which is such a fascinating choice in the 1940s.
Yeah, it is such an interesting choice. And it also is I don't feel like the partnerships, both partnerships feel a little bleak at the end. We've got Rochester sort of blind. But
Blind.
at least, I don't know, they reunite in this way that you're like, it's going to be okay. And yet with Rebecca, there is something about it that makes me feel a little uneasy about the way they're going to go forward.
As someone who's just written a novel about two young girls taking basically their bodily autonomy in their own hands, right? Why do you think we keep coming back to a version of this story?
I mean, I think there's something about, again, that sort of like Cinderella rags to riches story, a makeover story that's very, very appealing to us. All of those books and movies have a moment where they really could have someone else, and they don't, and they pick these kind of thoughtful girls, and I think that gives maybe more nerdy girls hope. I don't know why I liked it. Like I'm trying to think why I mean, it's not that I wanted to live in a cold castle in England somewhere, but I think it was just, there's something about being plucked out of obscurity that is very pleasing, I think. And also to see these girls sort of, they don't change hugely. Like one of the things that's always interesting to me about Rebecca is she kind of looks the same throughout. Like she doesn't dress a whole lot better once she's married. She doesn't look fashionable when she arrives back at the house hugely. The only thing is that party scene, she gets the costume and looks fancier, but they all seem sort of true to themselves a bit. And even Jane Eyre is like that. She doesn't change hugely. And I think there's something as a young woman reading those books and seeing the movies, that was very appealing to me, that they didn't become someone they weren't, I guess, to please these men.
I mean, in Jane Eyre, ultimately, she basically says, this is who I'm going to be, and you have to accept it. And he does. He wants that, right? And he like wants to chase after her. Like when we find out that he's been searching for her, and, you know, I think we're all like, oh, yeah, you can be yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
Someone will fall in love with you. I do want to talk about this thing that they had to change in the Daphne du Maurier novel. Maxim actually has killed his wife. In this film, it's revealed that, you know, he struck her, or she tripped and she fell and she hit her head, and then he's got to cover it up because he feels like, you know, he's people are going to be suspicious of him. I mean, obviously there's the production and code in place that says if he really had killed her, they couldn't have their happy ending.
Right.
We as an audience want them to have the happy ending, and that's why we're there, right? Is to see the happy ending. But what does this love that you said that Laurence Olivier is actually like besides the point in this whole movie. But that's an interesting character to set this young girl up against, is like a murderer who doesn't articulate how he's feeling, who's hiding something, but she's there wanting to be with him.
Right.
I mean, again, we as older women look at it now and go, this seems dangerous and unwise.
Right. I mean, it's so interesting because I did see the movie first. And so, I mean, you think of Rebecca as the villain, like she's trying to make him kill her. The twist of her being sick was such so surprising to me. I mean, Hitchcock got me there. I really wasn't sure what the heck was going on. But if he had been a killer in the movie, I mean, he probably was rich enough that secret probably could have gone to the grave. You know, it could have been fine. But I don't think. Yeah, we would not have liked it. We would not have been the happy ending we wanted. And I think we would have always been like, oh, she's gonna sleep with one eye open. Though you get the feeling she's trapped in this marriage forever, no matter what, in some weird ways. No matter how it ended, they weren't going to divorce. She doesn't have the class or the means or what is her life going to be otherwise? I mean, I guess she could leave and go back to being a companion. I mean, when I saw it when I was younger, I'm like, well, at least she's rich. Now I'm like, don't stay. But I mean, of course, you think that's going to solve I don't know. Like in that time in the 1940s, England, it just seems like, oh, this seems like a great option. But I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
It's not. For being a black and white film, I watched the remake of it that was a few years ago, and I really hated that version. That I can't remember.
I couldn't get into it.
Yeah, I couldn't either. I just didn't feel any of and I like Lily James, but I just didn't. Yeah, it just was not my cup of tea to see. I just feel like that Hitchcock is the gold standard forever and ever of Rebecca. It will never change. You can't. The Netflix was just not just didn't have the same like stress on it. I don't know. The Hitchcock just makes foreboding so well and doesn't have it.
Right.
Just doesn't have it.
Thanks to Nina for taking time out of her busy schedule to speak with me. She's on a book tour right now for How to Commit a Post-Colonial Murder, which I recommend. Pick up a copy near you. I loved hearing about how Nina's mother, who is a Wyoming legend in her own right, brought movies to Casper. So inspiring for me. I mean, it never occurred to me that you could do something like that. Let's talk about a few recommends for movies that vibe with Rebecca. If you're interested in Rebecca's side of the story, you might consider Leave Her to Heaven with Gene Tierney from 1945. These films are not related, right? But Leave Her to Heaven is like this twisted parallel where the protagonist is a gorgeous, smart, obsessive who wants her husband all to herself and kills to make it happen. Even herself. You heard that right. It's in brilliant Technicolor and has so many twists and turns that you will literally gasp out loud. From 1945, you will gasp out loud. Plus, Vincent Price as the lawyer prosecuting the husband after the death of the protagonist, sheer gold. If you want to explore more Hitchcock in his American black and white period, his very next film is Shadow of a Doubt, with the then American girl next door, Teresa Wright, as Charlie, who has a very uncomfortable relationship with her Uncle Charlie, played by the Joseph Cotten. Uncle Charlie is the serpent who comes slithering into small-town paradise, and his niece has to decide between her loyalty to him and her family and her demand for truth. If you want to explore another Jane Eyre reworking, I totally recommend Val Lewton's 1943 I Walked with a Zombie from RKO Pictures. This is a horror film about a young nurse brought to the Caribbean to care for the wife of a sugar plantation owner. The zombies here are voodoo zombies, which for my money is so much more upsetting than Hollywood's version of zombies. Because for people who practice voodoo, zombieism is one way to symbolize their experience of chattel slavery. It's all there if you have eyes to see. Do I recommend the 1943 Jane Eyre with our very own Joan Fontaine now playing Jane Eyre? I mean, it's got Orson Welles as Rochester and Agnes Moorehead and Elizabeth Taylor. But look, Joan Fontaine is too beautiful to play Jane Eyre. So do with that what you will. Voiceover is a production of BYU Radio and is edited by Spencer Boyer. I'm your host, Heather Bigley.